Macbeth, adapted from Macbeth by William Shakespeare.
Two men raced their horses across the flat grey Scottish plain. They were Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, and Banquo, a general in the king's army, returning from a war they had won, and their faces shone with triumph. Suddenly, out of nowhere, three withered old women who danced around the witch's cauldron appeared before them. The first witch saluted Macbeth and shrieked, "All hail Macbeth, Thane of Glamis!" True enough, thought Macbeth, he was the Thane of Glamis. The second figure said, "Hail to thee, Macbeth, Thane of Cawdor." But how was that? "I am not the Thane of Cawdor," wondered Macbeth. The third figure screeched, "All hail Macbeth, who shall be king hereafter." Macbeth stared in amazement. But King Duncan was alive, and so were his two sons, the princes Malcolm and Donalbain. The three creatures now danced weirdly around Banquo, chanting in high, cackling voices, "Hail, lesser than Macbeth, yet greater. You shall give birth to kings, but never be one." Then they vanished. "Have we gone mad?" whispered Banquo. Both the men stood there, not sure whether what they had seen and heard was real, when two horsemen came riding up to them. Duncan, the King of Scotland, had sent them to receive the brave and victorious generals. They had good news for Macbeth. "The king has granted you the title of Thane of Cawdor." Macbeth's heart stood still. The second prophecy had come true. What would happen to the third? The messengers also told Macbeth, "The king will stay with you tonight in your castle." Macbeth's spirit soared. The king in his house? What an honor! He sent a message to his wife telling her of this privilege. He also wrote to her about the witches. When Macbeth reached his castle, he noticed that his wife was dreaming of power. "Let's murder King Duncan tonight," said his wife fiercely. Macbeth was full of horror at this plan. But the thought of becoming the king seized him completely. And so, that night, when King Duncan was asleep, a trembling Macbeth stabbed Duncan with the two daggers his wife had placed there. The terrible deed was done. In the morning, all hell broke loose. The king had been murdered. Malcolm and Donalbain, Duncan's sons,
And the rightful heirs to the throne
fled from Scotland, fearing for their lives. In time, the nobles agreed that Macbeth should be their next king. He was a mighty general and a person whom the king had loved. The third prophecy made by the witches had now come to pass. Soon, Scotland became a gloomy kingdom. There was fear everywhere. Macbeth, still troubled by the witch's prophecy about Banquo, cleverly arranged for Banquo to be murdered. When Macbeth held a feast to which he invited all the nobles, Banquo's ghost, smeared with blood, took his seat at the table. Worried and terrified, Macbeth sought the three witches again. The smoke from the bubbling cauldron began to take shapes. "Beware of Macduff, the Thane of Fife," said the first figure. "Only if Birnam Wood moves to your castle will you be in danger," said another. Macbeth was at peace. Birnam Wood was a forest. Who had ever heard of a forest moving like a man? He was safe, but he had to kill Macduff. A new reign of terror began. Macduff's wife and children were murdered. So was anyone who seemed to be a danger to Macbeth. Meanwhile, Lady Macbeth began dreaming that she had blood marks on her hands all the time, marks that would never come off. She became depressed and unhappy and finally took her own life. Macduff, on the other hand, formed an army with Duncan's son Malcolm. Macduff ordered his soldiers to cut down branches from Birnam Wood and carry them so that Macbeth would not know the exact number of soldiers in the army. When Macbeth's soldiers saw the army, "Birnam Wood is moving!" they shouted. Macbeth realized that his end was near. A gruesome battle took place, and Macbeth's last thoughts were that he should have never trusted the three witches. Malcolm, the lawful king, ascended the throne. In later years, Banquo's son Fleance became the ruler of Scotland. The witches had been right.